Realm presents Orphan Black, The Next Chapter, starring Tatiana Maslany. Episode 8.
2 days earlier. Rachel Duncan watched the timer on her computer's monitoring software tick down. 3, 2, 1, 0. A new timer replaced it for 15 minutes as the internet blocks and screen recordings lifted. Finally, time for lunch. That's what the Wellspring Analytics Outreach Center called her 15-minute meal break, anyway. 15 blessed minutes to herself between scolding surly dropouts on phone sales etiquette and keeping cheeseball crumbs out of their company keyboards. It was a far cry from managing a multinational pharmaceutical corporation, but it was hers. She unlocked her personal drawer, slid it open, and retrieved a protein bar from the bulk box inside. She supposed it didn't count as lunch if it was midnight, but it was the closest she got these days. Rachel ripped off the headset she used to monitor her direct reports outreach calls and shoved back from her desk with a groan. The protein bar tasted like some kind of extruded paste as she tore into it, leaving teeth marks. But then nothing tasted good these days. She'd pruned her life back so carefully that she'd cut it to the quick, and then trimmed some more. 14 minutes remaining, the screen flashed. Don't forget to stretch. Wellspring was just the latest in Rachel's chain of should-have-been vertical turned out to be lateral job changes across the hellish sprawl of Canadian business parks and middle management roles within them. It never failed to stun her how exhausted this work left her. The endless fixation these jobs had with the most minor of metrics, endless procedures and forms and protocols that had to be followed lest their razor-thin profit margin evaporate. It was all nonsense anyway. The CEOs didn't give a shit who said too many times an hour on cold calls or whether they'd made 0.03% more sales in a given area code that month. She certainly hadn't when she was one. When she was queen. Rachel swallowed the clay-like lump of protein bar and pinched the bridge of her nose. Those days were over, and for good reason. This was the safe path, the one that kept her far away from the ones who embarrassingly call themselves sestras, and all the attendant nightmares. This was survival. And like a shark, Rachel had always known how to survive. All she had to do was keep swimming. Never mind that it felt like treading water. Like her lungs were already burning as she sank and sank. Like safety was a lead weight around her neck, sending her into the depths. She opened a web browser, 12 minutes remaining, and navigated to one of the few news sites that wasn't blocked during breaks. Royals drama, American congressional drama, billionaire tech bro failing another spaceship launch. Rachel stopped, her hand nearly crushing the mouse. Her face stared back at her from the next headline. Several of them, in fact. Rachel pulled her purse out of her personal drawer, leaving the remaining protein bars behind, and stormed out of the cubicle farm. "Hey, Duncan!" Stewart trotted toward her, headset teetering on his balding scalp. "Where are you going? You've got 4 more hours on the overnight shift." "I quit," Rachel said. "Nuh-uh. Protocol says mandatory 2 weeks notice." Rachel was already stepping into the elevator, phone in hand. The search engine spat out the phone number she wanted, and she hit call. "Headline News tip line," the person on the other end said. Now. The car's engine whined as Em and Kira tore down the empty country 2-lane into the ink of night. Tore being a relative word when talking about Em's jalopy. Kira couldn't trust the rearview mirror to reveal any unheadlighted pursuers, so she kept tossing glances over her shoulder, which sent them veering toward the road shoulder and the rumble strips that threatened a surprise reappearance from her dinner. And then she'd jerk the car back while Em screamed. "What are you doing? It's a straight road!" Kira jammed the gas pedal as hard as she could, invoking even more pathetic squealing from the undercharged engine. "I never got my license." They'd both seen it. The mosquito swarm inside Sauveterre's cabin in the middle of November. The shadowy figure in the cabin. the man stalking toward them as he reached for something at his waistline. Kira had encountered quite enough men with guns in her short but sensational life, and it seemed pretty obvious to her they were about to get shot over witnessing something, even if they didn't understand just what. She was driving only because in their mad dash from the cabin, Kira had made it to the car first. "Kill the lights and pull over," Em barked. "There's no one following us." Kira rocketed onto a dirt access trail, the thick trees around them instantly swallowing up all hint of starlight. She slammed the brakes, unable to tell how much the road curved without their headlights on. She shut the engine off, and there was one blessed moment of silence as she struggled to catch her breath. Then the dome light turned on with a faint ding. "Stupid light," Kira muttered, hitting the switch. Then her entire body melted into the driver's seat as all the adrenaline left her at once. "What the fuck?" Em said, watching out the back window, but the highway was completely obscured. Kira yanked her curls back from her face and sucked in a breath. "Who was that? Who was that? Did he see us?" "I'm guessing that's why he pulled a gun on us," Em grimaced. "Even if he didn't follow us, he probably took down our plate." "That doesn't matter. What's he going to do? Go to the police and complain that we witnessed him committing a crime?" "He could be the police," Em said, sending a shudder through them both. Kira knew full well how often the boys in blue were happy to be complicit with, if not the outright source of, any of the myriad conspiracies she'd survived. "Let's just think a minute," Kira gulped down air. "What do we know so far?" "We know Dr. Bai's a lying asshole," Em said. Point. Kira counted on one finger. "We also know the DNA Sauveterre gave Gene Keep is probably what trashed the servers. So possibly another lying asshole?" "Based on what we saw in the brewery, definitely an asshole." Kira hesitated a moment. "And we think that Dr. Bai gave someone else access to the data, someone dangerous, before it all got wiped out." "But what does that have to do with Sauveterre?" Em asked. "Why did he give someone else access when the whole point of Gene Keep is protecting and saving data?" "Damn it, I have no idea." Kira clenched her jaw. "But it can't be anything good. People determined to get access to that kind of information, people willing to hide it, and someone who had Dr. Bai spooked enough to confront Sauveterre like that." They sat in silence for a moment, with no sound but the bitter wind snaking its way around the car. "You sound like you have a personal experience with something like that," Em said quietly. Kira shrank back in her seat. "Look, Em, there's some stuff you should know about my family." "Wow, that's not ominous or anything." Em tried grinning, but it fell away as she glanced at Kira's face. "Sorry, trying to lighten the mood." Kira twisted her fingers together like a budding lattice, a helix. "All those clones on the news, they're kind of..." She swallowed. "My mom." Em tucked her chin down against her chest, gaze fixed on Kira. "Excuse me? I mean, one of them's my mom, but her clones, her sisters, they're all my aunts, and..." Kira gulped down air. The small car was even smaller suddenly, constricting around her. "And all my life, we've had people chasing after us, trying to mess with our genes or wanting to use them. And I wanted to work for Gene Keep because I care a lot about safeguarding genomes, obviously, but also because I want to understand my own genes, and I just think we have to do something, right? Or someone could get hurt." She glanced toward Em, eyes gleaming in the dimness. "I don't want to get anyone else hurt." "Wow, okay, that's a lot to process." Em looked at her with something different in her expression. Awe. "But it totally explains why you're so invested in gene security, it's cool." She ran a hand through her hair. "I have so many questions." Kira managed a feeble smile. But hey, don't beat yourself up, Em said, reaching across the console to squeeze Kira's hand. People chasing you, wanting to mess with your genome, it's not your fault. Just like it isn't your mom's fault, your aunt's fault, that they were born as clones. We play the hand we're dealt, right? Kira suppressed a wild laugh. If only Em had any idea. But she smiled to herself from the warmth of Em's hand on hers. Well, if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're better off tackling things together. Kira sat up. Okay, we should at least try emergency services first to help Softail, but why? Em asked, eyebrows drawing down. Trust me, a lot of situations where I'm from, at least, they only make things worse. Kira winced. Em had only mentioned her experiences growing up on a First Nations reservation, but it was enough to make clear her distrust of law enforcement. I'm sorry, I'm an idiot, of course, I didn't mean... Chill. Em tilted her head toward Kira as she curled into her seat. They may be a bunch of insular francophones, but you're probably right. For them, at least, cops might be the safest option. Em's hand slipped out of Kira's. I just don't want to be there when they come, is all. Kira nodded, her throat still thick, and started poking around on the phone. Believe me, I don't either. Let's see if I can even get anything on the satellite service. Just keep it anonymous, right? Kira started to give her a thumbs up, but stopped halfway there, realizing how incredibly dopey it was. Only now she was just making a dumb hand signal. Thankfully, she was spared any further embarrassment by the call connecting through. Emergency services, what is the nature of your emergency? Yes, I wanted to report some suspicious behavior, Kira said, affecting a needlessly deep tone. Nazwinig village, someone meddling with the gas lines. The dispatcher burst into a laugh. Well, that's a great sign, Em muttered. Sorry, dear, you must be a visitor. I'm afraid we don't service Nazwinig. At the village council's request. Of course, those grumpy francophones would insist on that kind of independence. Kira slumped her forehead to the steering wheel with a groan. Okay, thanks, bye. Kira ended the call and whirled on Em. Em, don't say it. We have to. Go back. Yeah, I know. She covered her face in her hands, bangles sliding down to her elbows. Sure, let's head back and confront the mystery man who's, I don't know, chloroforming the mayor or something. I'd settle for warning the mayor whose house he was tampering with. All right, fine, but I'm driving, and at the first sign of trouble, we're gone. Deal. They traded seats. Em steered them back onto the deserted highway, and Kira hoped they weren't making a huge mistake. Vivi stretched out into the crackle of dried leaves on the hillside and pulled out her binoculars. With Sturgis dead and the Mountie apparently content to stay holed up with the clones, Vivi had followed the only other lead she had, Greg Kurtzman, Sturgis's contact at the Ministry of Defense. And after a long and boring afternoon parked within sight of the Toronto offices of the Ministry of Defense, Kurtzman had led her to this large, featureless building in the suburban wasteland north of the city, a place that ticked all of Vivi's alarm buttons. Close to the city, but not too close, check. Far enough from the road to discourage idle curiosity, check. Far enough from the neighbors so they wouldn't hear any weird noises or screams, check. Totally meaningless signage, in this case, Jefferson Equine Estates, check. And Vivi swung her binoculars around the perimeter. Inexplicably serious surveillance and alarm systems. Check. Whatever Kurtzman was doing here, he didn't want anyone to know about it. Vivi paused as her sweep of the binoculars caught movement on a nearby slope. She froze and peered at the source of movement, then smiled. It seemed that Sergeant Prianta hadn't been satisfied staying in after all. Don't move. The voice from behind Jayasara was calm, controlled, and immediately familiar. So familiar that it made her heart leap for a second in the hope that it might be Cosima, impossibly escaped. If it's all right with you, I'm raising my hands slowly. Giessera enunciated. Do it, then answer my questions, Mountie. How did you find this place? Can I turn around? Giessera asked. I know you're a clone. A hiss. Just answer the question. I was able to find a reference to a black box site used by Greg Kurtzman's team. What do you want Kurtzman for? Giessera wondered if her interrogator didn't want to let her turn around because she was unarmed, but decided she wasn't ready to risk it. He took my suspect away, Cosima Niehaus, and I no longer trust what he or his department might do with her. The tone of the silence behind her changed. Cosima Niehaus is in there. The voice sounded not unsure, but as though it were running through possibilities. Giessera cleared her throat. I arrested her for the murder of Nathaniel Sturgis. She didn't do it. But also for espionage. I thought she was a cover identity for the CIA operative named Vivi Valdez. A rough hand grabbed Giessera's shoulder and spun her around. How do you know that name? The clone's face was up against hers, and what was definitely a gun pressed into her body. Giessera breathed deeply. After the Grit bombing, the CIA contacted my superiors to tell them we had a rogue spy in the country. The grip and the gun didn't waver, but something in the clone's expression sagged. Burned, she muttered. Agent Valdez, I presume? Giessera said cautiously. Maybe we can help each other out. Valdez's eyes flicked back into intensity. I need to get Cosima Niehaus out of there and figure out what's going on. Giessera went on. It sounds like that could be useful to you, too, and frankly, even ignoring the fact that she currently had a gun trained on her, I could use the help. There was a long pause, and then slowly Valdez smiled. It was not a comforting sight. All right, Mountie, Valdez said. But I think I'm better suited to infiltration and extraction, and I don't give a shit about warrants or permission, so I'm going in. She let go of Giessera's shoulder to reach into her pocket and pressed an earpiece into Giessera's hand. But I'd appreciate your insight into the inner workings of Kanakistan, and... She glanced down the hill to where Giessera had parked. Your bells and whistles if we have to make a quick escape. She leaned in close. Don't cross me, Mountie. Then she loped off into the undergrowth. Airports in the midpoint between night and morning took on a shimmering, unearthly quality that unsettled Davis no matter how many times he passed through them. The sound of industrial floor waxers running in the distance, the tinny, watery sounds of the speaker system announcing yet another delay, the other passengers with hollowed-out stares who'd left their souls a few time zones away, and the incessant prattle of the 24-hour news channel, yammering on a loop as if they shouldn't all be asleep, as if they wouldn't all be safer to ignore the world burning beyond the runway. Davis certainly would have liked to be, but when no one else could get the job done, it was safer to do it himself. Especially now that the whole damn thing was out in the open. Any window they had to keep this ill-advised, poorly managed clone program out of the public eye was rapidly snapping shut with this latest media disaster. He shouldered his satchel as he stormed down yet another interminable corridor. The news cycle flipped over to another repeat. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of women around the globe, all of them identical genetic clones. The big-haired anchorwoman segued. Yes, Davis thought. That would be the meaning of the word clone. I'm here now with Rachel Duncan, a renowned former biotech executive who not only has extensive working knowledge of these clones, she is one herself. Davis's head snapped up toward the screen. Thank you, Linda. I'm so happy to be here. The past few days have been such a whirlwind, but I'm so grateful for the chance to share my story at long last. Linda leaned in eagerly toward Rachel Duncan. She looked like an older version of the women in the hospital and from the countless headshots he'd paged through when he took this project on. But there was an edge to this one, something whittled and predatory in her expression. Davis had seen women like that in the upper echelons of the agency. They were fierce allies to whoever backed them up, and everyone else needed to get far, far away. So tell me, Rachel, what was your reaction when you learned your clone's sisters had gone public? Well, I was surprised, of course. Rachel affected a measured laugh. All of the other clones I worked with in the past were all very concerned with their privacy. But honestly, it came as a relief. I thought, finally, I no longer have to conceal who and what I am. And what is that, exactly? Linda asked. In your own words. Rachel smiled, like she already knew the camera was zooming in on her. The next stage in evolution. So many mysterious groups, like the infamous Dyad Foundation and Neolution Movement, tried to contain us. They tried to make us their own. But no one but another clone can truly grasp what we are. And no one understands the intricacies and science as well as I do. Davis tilted his head. She was obviously angling for employment somewhere, somehow. But even she couldn't know about the Scientific Vanguard Department's program. Are you saying you've been in contact with other clones, Miss Duncan? For quite some time, yes. I've always known what I am. Rachel's incisors flashed in another sharp smile. And now that we are no longer held back by the secrecy that restrained us, I know there's so much more that we can be. Davis stared at the screen a long moment before realizing he'd stopped in the middle of the terminal corridor. Rachel Duncan seemed like the sort of person who could be a fierce ally or dangerous enemy. But if she got herself mixed up in the agency's business, then either way, he'd want to keep her on a very, very short leash. So, that bit about 274 clones, Em said. Yep, we had the names and addresses for all of them. Kira squashed her lips. My aunt, to me she's my aunt, even though she and my mom are genetic duplicates. She had to figure out a cure for an illness they all had, and then there's all the psycho cults and companies that tried to use them, and Kira sighed. Let's just say my childhood wasn't exactly normal. And now you're not even an adult yet and lying your way into a genetics nonprofit. Em drummed her fingernails on the steering wheel, her expression unreadable. Are you mad? Kira asked. What she really meant was, are you disappointed in me? But that probably sounded too much like something a kid would say. I don't know what I am. Awestruck? Like, you're the offspring of a clone, and you obviously know a lot about the science behind it all. And believe me, I get why you had to keep it a secret, but also, I'm not sure what your play is. I'm not playing anything. Kira ran her palms across the thighs of her jeans. I just want to help people the best way I know how. And how is that, exactly? Em asked. Kira took a deep breath. Her mother's voice was screaming in the back of her head to keep all their secrets. But if Kira couldn't trust anyone, then what was the point? She could choose for herself. My genome, Kira said softly. I have this gene, Lin28A. It's like a super fast healing gene. It's the reason we had so many people after us when I was younger. People who wanted to use it for their own purposes, but it seemed selfish to keep it to myself too. I thought that if I could study it, maybe I could unlock some way to help others. Em laughed softly, but there was no cruelty to it, just an astonished little breath of air that made Kira's heart flutter. How are you even real? What do you mean? You come from this wild sci-fi family of clones, you have amazing genes, you're already like a genius scientist, and you actually genuinely care about other people. It's just kind of amazing. Kira's fingers tightened against each other in her lap. You really think so? Wouldn't you think you were if you were on the outside looking in? Don't ever doubt yourself, girl. You're incredible. And I don't think it's just your genes either. Em cut her eyes sideways toward Kira for a second. It's who you are as a person. Me, Kira echoed. She let those words warm her all the way back to Neswinek. The village looked exactly as they'd left it. Kira didn't know what she'd been expecting. Explosions, chaos, rioting. But whatever the man had been doing, it didn't seem to have changed anything dramatically. And further, as they wound their way back down the gravel road toward Sauveterre's cabin, there was no sign of the black van and shadowy figure. It was all as if he'd never been there. Well, this is downright anticlimactic, Em said. Look, his lights are still on. She pointed to the dim glow radiating through Sauveterre's ratty curtains. They parked in front of Sauveterre's cabin and made one more quick scan of the village, all the gaps between houses. Still no shadowy figures. They really had been jumping at shadows then. The hell was she doing out here? It was insanity, plain and simple, yet another thing she'd inherited from her mother, most likely, a desperate need for drama. But no, she was doing exactly what she told Em, helping people who needed it. That wasn't something to be embarrassed about or apologize for, like Em had said. They'd seen something potentially bad happening, and if she didn't act, and someone got hurt, well, Kira didn't want to live with that. She marched up to the front door with Em in tow, and hoped to hell she was overreacting. More lights flicking on, the sound of several latches and chains being unfastened. Well, that was new. Paranoid much? Then the door cracked open, revealing Gilles Sauveterre in a ratty t-shirt, rattier sleep pants, and an even shittier mood than he'd been in a few hours earlier. In one hand, he clutched a can of bug spray. Kira couldn't see his other hand, but it didn't seem out of the realm of possibility that it held a gun. She said. Qu'est-ce que vous voulez, les gosses? He growled in French. Every sensible thing she could possibly say immediately flew from her head. We saw someone outside your house when we left earlier, and... He grimaced, scratched fiercely at his arm with his other hand, which did, in fact, have a handgun in it. Kira took half a step back. He muttered something in French she didn't quite catch, possibly about fleas. Now that her eyes were adjusting, it did seem like his bug bites had gotten worse. Way worse. And there was also a sizable red welt creeping up from under the collar of his shirt. Warning bells were blaring in the back of her head now. Didn't Charlotte say something about itching? A rash? Sir, are you feeling all right? Look. He finally stopped scratching, though he'd left streaks of blood across his arm from digging so hard. What is it this time? Are you working for buy? Are you looking to wreck our watershed? You brats think you can meddle with our village, disrupt our way of life. He tottered forward, eyes fluttering, caught himself on the doorframe. His face was so pale, like some kind of blood sugar crash. But we won't... He dropped to his knees, then slumped forward, body twitching with convulsions. Em screamed. Kira kicked the gun out of his hands. What do we do? She shrieked. You tell me. You're the one used to dealing with this. She reached down and tried to roll him onto his back, but he'd wedged the door against himself with one knee. Kira tried to scrounge up the rudimentary first aid training she'd had. Air passageways were clear and unobstructed. He was flat on his back. He needs an ambulance, but there's no service to the village, Em groaned. We'll have to drive him. It took both of them to wrestle Gilles into the backseat of Em's car, wasting precious minutes. His breathing was stable, but he was slipping in and out of consciousness, and that fierce rash was growing brighter by the moment. Em took over driving this time, while Kira rode shotgun, twisting around constantly to check on Gilles' status. What do you think's the matter with him? Em asked, once they reached a straight stretch of road. You don't think it has to do with what we saw earlier, do you? Seems too coincidental otherwise. Kira studied the thick rash spreading almost before her eyes. It was so sudden from that evening when he'd been perfectly fine, if drunk and irate in the brewery. Sudden, just like what Charlotte had experienced in Boston, with the exact same symptoms. Em, Kira said, I think whatever's wrong with him, there's a genetic component to it. She started to fumble her phone out to text Charlotte, but they were still out of service. We have to keep him away from the other villagers. Okay. Em took a few quick breaths. Well, the hospital is far enough away that we... Abruptly, Gilles' hand darted out to snatch Kira's wrist. She yelped as his nails dug in, but he was surprisingly strong for someone in his state.
The village. You have to protect them.
Gilles rasped.
The virus, I put it in this sequence. Tried to take out their data, but it wasn't enough to stop him. Dr. Bai, the rest, they won't stop.
Won't stop what? Who? Kira leaned forward. What's Dr. Bai doing? But Gilles' eyes fluttered shut, and he sagged back down, arm falling away from Kira's. What do you think he means? Em asked. Kira looked at Em. That we're in even deeper than I thought. I'll tell you one thing, Vivi said conversationally as a way of testing the comms. This place is definitely not some elite horse farm. There's a ton of surveillance out here. Priyantha's sigh came through loud and clear. What are you going to do? Do you have one of those portable EMPs or some anti-surveillance face paint or a fancy disguise? Not saying I don't, but I'm thinking something a little more low-tech. Vivi scrounged around on the gravel driveway, like a really heavy rock. What? Priyantha asked, but Vivi was already winding up her pitch. Only one camera had a clear view of the drive leading up to the main compound this far out, and it was low enough that even she could comfortably hit it. Crack. The camera's infrared node went cockeyed as the rock struck home. Then it tipped forward until it was just barely dangling in its moorings. Then, in almost slow motion, it tumbled out of the tree like the world's most suspicious acorn. You're not hurting anyone, are you? Priyantha asked, scolding. As long as they don't try to hurt me first. That isn't reassuring. Vivi sprinted into the thicket of hedges near the tree she'd struck. If this place was anything like she suspected, they'd be sending someone, or, unfortunately, someones, out to check the camera immediately. She only hoped Canadian politeness meant they'd be brandishing, at best, some heavy sidearms rather than M16s. Sure enough, just a minute later, Vivi heard the low whine of an electric golf cart engine as it trundled up the drive from the main compound. 2 guards max. In the pre-dawn haze, she could just make out a maintenance ladder strapped to the back of the golf cart as well. Perfect. Vivi crouched down, gripping her own gun by the barrel, and waited. I tell you, it's these damn squirrels. The shorter guard muttered to Burly Boy as he hopped out of the cart. Chew straight through the wires every couple of months.
I'm not buying it. There's no such thing as coincidence at a site like this.
Burly Boy folded his arms across his chest and stood at parade rest while Shorty popped open the ladder.
Someone's probing our defenses, or...
Simmer down and hold the ladder, Frank. Shorty scolded him. With a grunt, Frank held the maintenance ladder steady while Shorty climbed. Vivi waited, adjusting her grip, until Shorty was just far up enough that getting down would take too long. Just a moment longer. She surged out of the bushes and swung her pistol up, the butt of it cracking against the underside of Frank's jaw. He grunted but dropped instantly. What the? Shorty started to reach for his comms, but Vivi yanked the ladder out from under him, and suddenly he had to use both hands to hang onto the tree, the walkie-talkie bouncing uselessly on its springy cord. Vivi seized him around his kicking legs and dragged him down into a stranglehold, then waited for the pressure on his pulse point to send him off into unconsciousness. Please tell me you're only subduing them, Priyantha grumbled, as Vivi set to work binding them and stealing Shorty's jacket, hat, and badge for her own. Zip ties, Mountie, zip ties. Don't call me a Mountie. Only if you'll stop calling me an agent. We're operatives, thank you very much. She stuffed her hair up under the hat brim, trying to ignore the clammy band of sweat clinging to it, and zipped up the jacket. Once Shorty and Frank were safely tucked back into the hedges and the second comm sealed in the golf cart's lockbox, she re-slotted the ladder, hopped into the driver's seat, and sped down the driveway, keeping the hat brim carefully angled. Parked in the garage bay. Started down the corridor after badging in at the door.
Hey, where'd Frank go?
Another guard poked his head out of what looked to be a monitoring station, a dark room filled with the sweet, sweet glow of dozens of CCTVs. Intel. Vivi's fingers practically itched at the sight of it.
He, went to grab some...
She glanced past the guard, no one else in the room. Frank and Shorty must have been the other two on duty.
Tim Hortons?
The guard's brow furrowed.
Wait, who the hell are...
She thrust her straight fingers into his Adam's apple, knocking him back into the station room. Slammed the door behind him. Kicked the comms out of his hand as he reached for it.
Really don't have time for this,
she grumbled, dropping her knee into his gut.
The fuck are you doing?
Finally, he too went unconscious. Zip tie, storage locker. Vivi let out a deep exhale and, with a shrug, helped herself to a mug of coffee from a makeshift station along the wall.
Well?
Priantha prompted. We're in, Vivi swallowed, but not for long. Allison had been driving on 91 for what felt like eons, her hands cramping against the minivan's steering wheel. She'd had it in a death grip ever since they'd fled that awful hospital in Boston with Dana in tow. Dana, another, younger clone, and a new disease, and a whole new government hunting them down. Fan-freaking-tastic. She'd left Charlotte and Dana wearing a gauze medical mask in the car while she ran in for snacks, but of course the television in the gas station was playing the news. Evangelical preachers railing against the clones' very existence, calling them aberrations of his intent, and a scientific tower of Babel about to come toppling down under the weight of their own hubris. Okay, maybe that last one felt uncomfortably true. Then she got back into the van to find the girls discussing it too. Apparently they'd been watching the broadcast through the windows while she ran inside. You didn't ask to be some science experiment, a guinea pig for helping others figure out how to cure their illnesses. Dana stared down at her hands. Any more than we did. I wouldn't change anything about it, though. My cousins and I can't imagine having a better family. I know, Charlotte said. She was still weak and sweaty, but though she had dozed through much of the first 5 hours of travel, she seemed coherent now. But I can understand why people are upset, confused. It challenges what we think of as personhood and the ethics of science writ large. Maybe, though, it's better they work through that anger now. If anything, we should be the angry ones. We aren't lab rats, Dana cried. We're just people. What does it matter? Allison cleared her throat. Is everything okay, girls? Charlotte ducked her head as Allison steered them back onto the highway. I'm sorry, Dana. I know it's a lot to take in, having our business out in the open this way. I guess I never thought of it that way, that we're lab rats. But that's it, isn't it? Dana asked. One tear spilled over. Getting us sick and curing us to learn how to cure everyone else. Is that what they did to you and your sisters? Charlotte bit her lower lip. It served a purpose. You know, when Vivi first disappeared, everyone tried to tell me she'd never existed. That I'd imagined it, or gotten her confused with one of the others. But I knew that was wrong. She sucked in her breath. When I got older, I wondered if maybe they'd done just that to her. I had all these horrible images of them experimenting on her. I was scared that I'd be next. But over time, no one else disappeared, and they were always so kind to us. We got a great education, a chance to pursue our hobbies, whatever we wanted. I never felt abnormal. What was more jarring was to see how the rest of the world lived, honestly. So it didn't scare you that Vivi had gone missing any longer? Charlotte asked. Dana nodded. I really believed her family just didn't want to be a part of the program any longer. That maybe she didn't like us as much as I thought. Hey, it's all right. She's alive, yeah? And so are we. We survived. Charlotte smiled sadly. If nothing else, we're survivors. We do more than just survive, Allison chirped. We rule. In the rearview mirror, Allison could see Charlotte sitting in the way back of the minivan, as far from Allison as she could get. Even around the face mask they had bought on the way out of Boston, she could tell Charlotte was smiling at her. What a joy to see yet another of her children grown and wise, in no small part for the model example she set for them. Everything okay, Auntie A? Charlotte asked. You look a little misty-eyed. What? I'm not. Allison fluttered her eyelashes. I was just thinking how proud I am of you kids. Auntie A, Charlotte groaned. It's true, and you can hardly blame me. We are all blood, aren't we? She beamed. Although there's something to be said for the grace that comes with age. She liked to think she wore hers well. So, what's the secret to aging well as a sestra? Dana asked slyly. Allison grinned. Usually, I just ask myself, what would Helena do? And do the exact opposite. Charlotte raised an eyebrow at her in the rearview mirror. Except when you don't. Allison tilted her head, allowing her that. But only when someone really deserves it. Vivi clenched her jaw as the progress bar on the screen inched painfully, excruciatingly toward complete. She doubted the security guards had access to any of the facility's most sensitive and therefore pertinent data, but it never hurt to smash and grab whatever she could, not when data was so easy to duplicate. She'd worry about digging through the morass later to find what she and Priyantha needed. Right now was still acquisition mode. Anything good? Priyantha chirped in her ear. Any signs of Niehaus? Nothing yet. Let me check the security feeds. Huh. Who's this clown? On one high-angled view, a man was yelling at his phone in a corridor, hunched forward, furious, an immovable force. Even heavily pixelated, his face matched that of the man she'd been tailing. Here he is. Vivi zoomed in on the camera and cranked up the volume. Just need more time, please. These are just temporary setbacks. Or not so in charge. Vivi murmured. There was a disruption in the plan. Greg went on. The test subject was isolated. We don't have data on the outcome. We might have to deploy the distribution method more aggressively. Yes, I've been wanting to test it more anyway. Are you hearing this? Vivi asked and heard Jessica's affirmative under Greg's continuing diatribe. Yes, I have her on site. The media blitz is a challenge, but we can still do this. I think she knows more than she'll say, but she won't talk. Vivi sat straight up and started scanning through the CCTV screens, each changing view every few seconds. Where was Niehaus? Fine. Greg ran his hands through his hair, pushing it into stiff, sweaty peaks. I'll get rid of her. No argument here. It takes no time to whip up a new strain for testing. Then, once we have the results from her, we can move to Plan B. With a snarl, he stormed off. You better find Niehaus fast. Priyantha sounded worried. No shit. Give me a second. Vivi called up the footage recorder and clipped the feed for later reference. Let me figure out where there might be some kind of lab here and... Oh dear. Vivi's eyes skipped across the logistics software, charting the comings and goings of transports and requisitions. Greg's online. He's putting in a new request. This must be the Plan B he mentioned. Vivi clicked on the details of one of the shipments. Cryogenic laboratory equipment, aerial dispersion devices headed for Nazweeneg. What in the actual hell? Nazweeneg. She could hear the frown in Priyantha's voice. Francophone separatists there. Nasty work, the lot of them. They came up as possible suspects in relation to the grip bombing as well, though we ultimately ruled it was way too sophisticated for them. Kind of funny that it was Sturgis the whole time, right? She could practically hear Priyantha wincing. Don't remind me. Vivi frowned. There's a lot of math here, but I don't quite know how to add it all up. Neither do I, but I don't think it's adding up to anything good. I want to find out how Giz Sauvetaire's separatists are involved, but first you need to find Niehaus and this weapon. I'm trying. Vivi flicked through more data, building schematics this time. She was still deeply uncomfortable keeping a foreign government's representative in the loop. But improvisation in the field had always been her strength. It was worth the cost. But if Kurtzman was going to test something on Niehaus, their time was rapidly running out. She checked the ID badge on her borrowed jacket, then called up an access management database to make sure she had the access she needed. She didn't, but a few quick keystrokes and Dale Masterson suddenly found himself promoted to laboratory researcher. All right, lab, here I come. The facility was mercifully pretty empty this early on a Saturday. Was it a Saturday? Everything was smearing together into one endless stretch of bullshit. She swiped Dale's badge to access the main laboratory, one hand on her sidearm, but no one was inside. Okay, strain VX24B. Why are they taking you to Neswinek? What do they want with you? This had to be connected to Sturgis's weapon, but she had no idea how. Why would they take it to some random village of terrorists? Unless... Vivi looked up, thinking, and stopped cold as her gaze caught a two-way mirror that slitted one edge of the laboratory. Something the matter? Priyantha asked. Vivi stared at the woman in the chair in the adjoining room. The one with her face. Her nose, minus the fracture. Her determined glower. She knew that look. Determination in the face of overwhelming defeat. And sitting opposite her, hands folded in his lap, a smirk on his face, was Greg Kurtzman. Yeah, Vivi said, mouth suddenly dry. You could say that. Sarah's fingers thumped against the kitchen table in Felix's condo as she listened to yet another failed call recording. Felix arched one eyebrow, looking from her stubby nails to her untouched beer with great specificity. In one swift movement, she managed to flip him off with one hand while slamming the phone down with the other. No word from the wayward chickadee? Felix asked as he stirred his Irish coffee. You know something, don't you? Felix concealed his mouth with a hearty gulp. Damn it, Fee, this isn't a joke. She's still a kid. She could be seriously hurt or... Felix set his mug down and gave her his most saccharine milk mustache smile. You think this is funny, don't you? Sarah chewed at a non-existent nail. They're after all the heartache I gave Mrs. S when we were kids. The resemblances are uncanny, he said, but you shouldn't worry. Kira's far better behaved than you ever were. Sarah groaned. Don't remind me. With another sour look at the beer, she blew a lock of hair out of her face. I'll never know why I thought I had any business being a mother, and now... Now, let's not have any of that talk. He leaned forward, capturing her hand with his. You've done a brilliant job with her. She's clever and compassionate and resourceful. That's all you're doing, you know. Can't even blame genetics for that one. She smiled shyly from behind a dark lock. Yeah, honest. And you did it all without sheltering her from the madness we've all had to deal with. She already knows how to handle anything that comes her way. God, I hope you're right, Sarah muttered. I always am. He flicked one hand. Besides, she's more likely to be off vaccinating vulnerable populations than immersing herself in sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I'm not worried about what she's doing, damn it. It's the rest of the world. Sarah picked up her beer and studied it suspiciously. Bad enough we've got this media circus hounding us now, but with Cosima missing and this ordeal in Boston... Sarah's rant cut off abruptly as her phone rang. Felix sat back, watching her once more. He had missed his sister. It was funny the way their dynamic had shifted as they both settled down to various levels of success. He never thought he'd find them sitting around a proper kitchen table again. His own artful, but still delightfully eccentric, portrait with Colin smiling down on them. It was a comfort, both in its familiarity and newness all at once. "And where the bloody hell is that?" Sarah snapped, then squeezed her eyes shut. "No, never mind, we'll be right over." She glanced at Felix. "And if I see one more fucking news truck, I'm gonna slash their tires." Yes. Still the Sarah he knew and loved. "Allison's back in town. We're meeting with them now. They've got a lead on Kira." She started to throw her keys at Felix, then yanked them back. "Like old times, yeah?" "God, let's hope not. My geriatric heart can't handle the strain." She gripped the back of his neck with a squeeze both affectionate and authoritarian and steered him toward the garage. "You sure this'll work?" Art asked, snapping the latex gloves into place. They were in Delphine's home lab on the second floor, which was still not finished, but fortunately had the equipment she needed for the test. Delphine carefully set the hair sample onto a slide tray and slotted it into her sequencer. "I'm not certain at all, but it seems appropriately dramatic for Monsieur Sturgis." Donnie had followed them up, mostly, Delphine thought, to distract himself from the fact that Allison was driving 2 sick clones across an international border. He hovered nearby, peering at the equipment when he wasn't obsessively checking his phone for updates now that Allison was heading into Toronto with them. Delphine shot him a look, one she hoped was sufficiently sympathetic, though she wanted nothing more than for him to be still. "At least it is a very small sample. It shouldn't take much time at all to..." The sequencer emitted a soft dinging noise. "That thing sounds way too much like a microwave." Art shifted closer as she beckoned him in. "Huh. Those look like GPS coordinates," Delphine asked, tapping one fingernail against the numbers on the screen. "Yup, and that's the right lat long for Toronto." "But what are the numbers at the end here?" Delphine asked. She called up a map site and plugged in the coordinates. The marker popped up, hovering over a specific building in a secluded strip mall in the outskirts of Toronto. "Top to bottom. What is it, a sex club or something?" She and Art exchanged a laugh. "Well," Art said, "I suppose I've visited stranger places to find leads. And if it explains what this tag project he was working on is all about." Donnie said. Both Art and Delphine turned to look at him. I think the other numbers might be a locker combination." "And what makes you think that?" Delphine asked. His face turned brilliant red. "Because Allie and I toured it when we were looking for somewhere to join ourselves." Delphine blinked furiously. You're members at Top to Bottom?" "No, God, no. We went with Déclassé. Give us a little credit." Donnie mumbled. She and Art exchanged glances. "Well, I hope you can stoop to join us for the afternoon," Art said. Casima's eyes fluttered, and for a few blessed minutes she clung to the fragments of dream, where she was curled up in a sumptuous bed with her gorgeous wife, and the golden sunlight was surely but insistently rousing them from slumber. Then the crick in her neck and sharp, cold pain along her wrists from the handcuffs snapped her awake. She groaned and tried to sit forward, but she'd been bound too tightly to do anything but shift around. Her bladder ached, her shoulders ached, and, dear goddess, ignoring the whole arrested and then dragged to a series of increasingly sinister detention facilities thing, she would kill for a hit of Wookiee right about now. Oh, and then there were the disquieted shuffles and grunts coming from the entire wall of caged lab animals beside her. "Hello, Miss Niehaus." Casima's attention darted toward the weaselly middle management type who stepped into the concrete room. Greg, whatever the fuck. "It's Dr. Niehaus." Greg waved his hand negligently. "Have you rethought your reluctance to tell me what you learned from Sturgis before you killed him?" "I didn't kill him," Casima said, weary with little hope that he would believe her. "That's not what I asked." Greg was attempting menacing, but Cosima noticed that he was fidgeting much more than the last time he tried to interrogate her. Had something gone wrong? And was that a good thing for her or a bad thing? I want to know what Sturgis told you and why he was talking to you in the first place. Greg's volume was building, and now he was standing up out of his chair. And how did you get your sneaky wife onto the task force anyway? You two must have been in this from the start. A bad thing, Cosima thought. Look, it's not like that. We just both work in genetics, and... Tell me what Sturgis told you, Greg thundered, or you're gonna learn something about genetics firsthand. Cosima couldn't help rolling her eyes at that one. Oh, you think it's funny, do you? Greg leaned in closer. It just so happens that your friend Sturgis had your genome on file. We didn't realize that until we saw your face all over the news, of course. What? That did shock Cosima. If her face was on the news, anything could happen. They could all be outed. But apparently Sturgis already did his first test without our approval, on some women just like you. Greg tapped Cosima's nose. It was so easy to make, after all. All we had to do was input that genome and input a much, much more unpleasant virus, and... Well, if you don't tell me what Sturgis told you, you'll find out exactly how easy. Cosima felt her hands shaking in the cuffs. Sturgis's weapon. He's talking about Sturgis's fucking genocidal weapon. Oh, fuck. He told me about the weapon, she said. There didn't seem to be any point in hiding it now. There. Is that so hard? Greg gave her a bladed smile. His test on the clone population in Boston was non-lethal, though. I'm afraid the lethal strain still needs a proper test. Cosima narrowed her eyes. Lethal strain? He said he meant his research to do good, she added pointedly. Oh, don't worry, Greg said grimly. It'll do good. It'll do a lot of good in the village full of terrorist separatists the day after tomorrow. Cosima gaped. You're targeting their genome with it? An entire population? That's genocide, you ass. It's not about their race or shared genome. That's just a coincidence. The point is, they're terrorists. They've been trying to break away from Canada for decades, using pipe bombs and riots to make their point. Sloppy. But they've hurt people before. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Which makes them an ideal test group. The only people at risk are those who deserve it, who are a threat to others. That's good, right, Dr. Bleeding Heart? You say that like it's yours to decide. Of course it is. He smiled, baring his teeth. Someone has to maintain order. Genetics are the next attack vector, and we have to make sure we're well defended. Sounds like you're the one going on the attack. Merely a necessity of testing. Now, back to Sturgis. Where is his backup copy of the tag program? Somewhere in platinum near his chest, and hopefully now in Art's possession. Cosima tried to act innocent. I have no idea. Greg waited, holding her eye for a long moment. Then you're no use to me, Greg said. Thank you for offering the testing opportunity I needed. And with that, he stood and walked out. Wait! Cosima yelled. But he was already leaving the room. The door latched and pneumatically sealed behind him, leaving her in silence. Until, that was, a faint buzzing sound rose up from the vents. Cosima jerked her head up just in time to see it. The swarm of what looked like gnats. What in the actual fuck? Was she about to be tortured by mosquitoes? But there was something unnervingly tinny about their buzzing sound, something all too harmonious. The swarm descended on her and every other living thing in the chamber. The rhesus monkeys howled in agony. The rabbits scampered, furious in their cages. Barks and squeaks and snarls, a chaotic symphony as the mosquitoes swarmed closer. Just close enough to see they weren't mosquitoes at all. They were miniature drones, and where their proboscis should be, glinted the fine tip of a syringe. Damn it, damn it, damn it! Red lights flared all around Vivi as she scoured the lab for some kind of manual override. "Test in progress," every screen announced, a wide array of vital signs displayed before her, all of them with elevated heart rates, but only one, human clone subject, caught Vivi's attention. "I've got to get her out of there," Vivi said, to herself as much as Prianta. "But it's not letting me override. It says only Kurtzman is authorized. This lab is supposed to be empty." The lab's doors slid open as Greg himself strode into the room. He immediately reached for the comms clipped to his belt. "Security, no one's coming." Vivi rushed forward and kicked the comms from his hand. Probably not strictly true, but she was hoping most of security was still tied up, either literally or figuratively. She just needed a little more time. "Another one? God, you freaks are everywhere." Greg parried her next strike, aimed straight for his solar plexus, and succeeded in tossing her off balance. "I've already got my test subject, but it never hurts to verify." She swiped the nearest glass beaker and sloshed it at him. "What the?" He shook off the warm liquid. Damn, she supposed it had been too much to hope for something dangerously acidic. "Enough," he said. "You aren't fucking this up for me." He pulled something else from his belt, a compact black handle, and with a shake of his wrist, it telescoped into a long metal tube with 2 prongs on the end. Vivi had seen cattle prods. She'd been on both ends of them in her time. But this was something more, something amplified. Greg lunged at her with it, electricity crackling fiercely. She dodged his first swipe, his second. There was no time to wait for a third. She seized the boom arm of the nearest piece of medical equipment and used its momentum to swing her, feet first, into his chest. He crashed backward into shelves of vials that shattered and burst all around him. His eyes closed. Blood trickled from multiple lacerations along his face and arms. But Vivi wasn't trusting it. She wrenched the cattle prod from his grip and hit him with a healthy dose of 120 volts. He shuddered, grabbing at his chest, then went still. Had she triggered a heart attack? Vivi leaned forward to check, but his pulse was steady, if weak, and his hands weren't digging into his chest but clutching something. Vivi pried open his fingers and found a USB on a lanyard.
"Vivi?"
Prianta asked. "On it," Vivi said, yanking the USB and slipping it into her pocket. She snatched Greg's badge from his belt and rushed toward the bank of computer consoles. She badged in and frantically smashed the override button until, finally, the flashing lights faded out. "Now ventilating test facility." The door that led to the test room finally, mercifully, unsealed with a weighty click. Vivi rushed into the room, one arm wrapped uselessly over her mouth. If this thing was designed to get Niehaus sick, then she was just as susceptible. With a frown, Vivi looked up to spot a swarm of insects swoop toward her. "The bugs, drone thingies," Niehaus shouted. "They've got the..." Vivi swung the cattle prod at them and hit the button along its side, presumably for an extra boost of voltage. She wasn't entirely sure what she expected to happen, but it wasn't this. Electricity arced out of the cattle prod and struck the first insect, then kept bouncing from there. Light flashed in a stunning web as it jumped from drone to drone with a powerful jolt. Vivi blinked, the afterimage seared into her retinas. As her vision began to clear, the tiny specks dropped from the air one by one. Did you mean to do that?" Niehaus asked, blinking furiously, like she wasn't sure if she was hallucinating the whole light show. Vivi shrugged. "Wasn't sure what it would do, but, good to know." Vivi dropped the prod and rushed forward to untie her, but Niehaus jerked her head away. "Careful," she grunted. "They were trying to infect me, the tag test." "Did you get stung?" Vivi asked, hovering. Cosima did a quick scan of herself. I don't think so. No." "Nice work with that thing, by the way." She tipped her head toward the device. Vivi sighed and shoved it in her back pocket. "Let's get out of here." She stared into Cosima's face, fierce and determined despite whatever she'd already endured in detention for days. It was Vivi's own face, the grim determination that Vivi felt herself. But that made it too easy to want to trust her. It offered a shortcut to a rapport they hadn't earned. There was so much she still didn't know about what was happening, about the clones, about this genetic weapon, about whatever had made the CIA go dark. But Niehaus had answers, at least a few of them. She'd been too close to the truth of whatever Greg and his accomplices were doing, and she already knew so much about the clones. Her sisters. Vivi's sisters. Cosima Niehaus was her best chance at learning the truth about Vivi Valdez. And that alone was more than enough. A wry, weary smile twisted one side of Niehaus's face. Then the alarms began to blare.
You're listening to Orphan Black, the next chapter, starring Tatiana Maslany. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Orphan Black, the next chapter is written by Malka Older, Lindsay Smith, Madeline Ashby, Mishell Baker, E.C. Myers, and Heli Kennedy. Produced by Marco Palmieri and executive produced by Molly Barton, Julian Yap, David Fortier, Ivan Shebeg, and Carrie Appleyard. In partnership with Boat Rocker Media and BBC America. Audio produced, sound designed, and edited by Amanda Rose Smith. Based on the television series Orphan Black, produced by Temple Street, a division of Boat Rocker Studios. The theme music is by Two Fingers.